All right. Morning. I know this is a little different here on the Bicoastal Baseball Podcast. Dalton and I are about a half hour each rolling out of bed, but we're here because there's some important subject matter that we have to attend to here. So I'm Mike Guido. That's Dalton Brown. As you know by now, this is the Bicoastal Baseball Podcast on the Grid Network, the only exclusive baseball podcast on the Grid Network. We have reached the league championship series. And I would say the matchups are pretty exciting. I'm actually feeling pretty good about what baseball got as far as these series are concerned. But Dalton, how you feeling this morning?
I mean, I'm feeling excited more than anything, which is kind of a fresh new feeling as a Dodger fan. It's kind of scary, but the existential dread decreased a little bit, which doesn't usually happen this time of year. Usually the existential dread is proven right pretty quickly and I move on with life. But yeah, I mean, look, nothing comes easy. Nothing's going to come easy, but I'm excited.
Yeah, it certainly is. And like I said, the matchups I think are going to be really, really outstanding. Mets and Dodgers in the National League for the pennant, and then Yankees Guardians on the other side. Again, really interesting stuff as far as matchups. We'll discuss that a little bit later. We'll rank the matchups. We'll preview each series. We'll go through it the whole bit. So pretty jam-packed today. We're going to be pretty busy. But first, as we always do, and honestly, as we can honestly say, rightfully so now, right? We're both in the championship series. So I feel less bad about doing this. But listen, we cater to our own fan bases at the beginning of the show. So you're just going to have to deal with it, right? As you can tell by the caps on our heads. See, I'm donning the old style fat logo Yankee hat today. Yankees, Dodgers. Here we go. Okay. So as far as the Yankees are concerned, last week I spent a little bit of time talking about and kind of losing my mind over fairly mediocre starting pitching to start the Kansas City Royals series. We then closed out that series with two really terrific starts from Clark Schmidt and Garrett Cole. So I guess I'm feeling okay. Like, I don't really know what else to say about that, right? I mean, Garrett Cole obviously seemed to shake off the rust. He put up a great start in Game 4. Clark Schmidt did better. Like, Clark Schmidt for most of that stuff, pretty much for the entire start, outpitched Seth Lugo, which I did not expect at all. But I think it kind of gives you a key into what you can see in his future. I think Clark Schmidt's a legit starting pitcher in this league. I think he's really turned into that. So it makes me feel pretty happy about that. Dalton, I think Luke Weaver's a dude. That dude seems to be he seems legit. And look, I don't want to jinx anything because I 100% believe in jinx. But he's been lights out. Forget about the postseason, but for the last month. I mean, he's in his last 50 something or his last whatever it is, 14 innings. He's got 28, 29 strikeouts. I mean, we're talking about some really electric stuff out of Luke Weaver to back end this bullpen. Clay Holmes in his new role seems to have picked up where he left off as being, a really solid major league reliever. So I think that there's something good going on with that. The concern that I would have is that Cleveland seems to be, and for some reason, I don't know how, but for some reason, they seem to have good pitching pretty much all around, right? Rotation, obviously bullpen with Clase and everything like that. I get all that. Rotation with Bybee, Boyd, and Cobb is apparently good enough to get you the ALCS. I don't know how, in what universe that's possible, but it is. And the Yankee bats have been, not impressive. I'll say that. Giancarlo Stanton has obviously, proven, he's kind of continued to prove that he's an outstanding postseason player. and I'm really glad to see that. I don't know how I should feel today about Aaron Judge as a postseason guy. Like, I genuinely want to use the argument of, well, if you're comparing Aaron Judge from 2017, 2018, and Aaron Judge now, I mean, he's just a completely different player. So the sample size is just too small, right? But, I mean, the guy's batting around 200 in his entire postseason career, and that's fairly scary for a guy that we've seen dominate baseball for at least the last 3 years. So it's a little concerning on that end. I think the bats obviously need to step up a little bit, especially against a Cleveland team that is going to pitch well. So I'm feeling okay, not overly confident, but okay heading into the series, Dalton.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable place to be, right? It's hard to feel any better than okay, if we're being honest. Like, but because the reality with baseball, and I was telling a friend this the other night, right? Like, if you if you're an NBA fan, right, and you're rooting and you're for one of the best teams in the NBA, right? Let's say you're a Denver Nuggets fan, right?
Yeah.
And the Nuggets are going into a series against the Detroit Pistons. Like, you genuinely are like, no, like, we're winning this series. Like, 100% we're winning this series in 7 games unless our entire roster gets hurt, right? What makes baseball different, and part of what makes it so special, is if you're a Dodgers or a Yankees fan and you're going into a 7-game series, even if that series is against, I don't know, the Cincinnati Reds, like, you still can't feel much more than 70% confident, because that's just how baseball is. It's the nature of the game. And so, like, I mean, it's part of what leads to such chaos, right? It's why we have so many wild card teams that end up making the World Series, a lot that end up winning the World Series. And so, that's the beauty of this time of year. As far as the Yankees in particular, like with Judge, I was kind of looking up the sample while you were talking about it. It is 48 games now in the postseason. So, like, there is a little bit of a sample there.
Yeah.
I do think if Judge got 48 games into a season and was still hitting 207, I mean, we're talking late May at that point, I think we'd be a little bit concerned. We'd be like, hey, where's his bat right now?
Yeah.
But these are, it's not all one 48-game sample together. These are small, disconnected samples being put together, which I think makes the sample play smaller. I am usually somebody who's like, I think postseason success can beget postseason success, if that makes sense. I don't always think postseason failure means that you are going to continue to fail in the postseason. But, like, the reality for the Yankees is, even though that lineup has gotten deeper, they need Judge and Soto to perform if they're going to World Series. Like, they do need those guys to perform. So it'll be interesting to see how they do against Cleveland. We'll get into that series a little bit more when we, like, kind of really preview it. I've got some very specific thoughts on where I think that series is won or lost. But, I mean, I'll tell you this much. You can't be complaining about the path as a Yankee fan that you've had put in front of you.
Nope. But listen, I'm happy with how the Kansas City series went, because you had that one hiccup in game 2, and then you virtually, I mean, from a pitching standpoint, you kind of dominated for the next 2 games with Kansas City at home. And, like, it's well documented how Kansas City were struggling at home over the past few weeks. Like, they had lost, like, whatever, 8 or 9 straight games at home. But even still, I mean, it's the postseason. It's almost like you wiped the entire regular season clean, and then it just becomes an entirely different game. So, but anyway, so I'm feeling pretty good. How are we feeling about the Dodgers?
So there are reasons that I feel a lot better than I did going into the last series. And anybody who tuned in the last couple of weeks heard me say that I thought we were going to get swept by San Diego. And I stand by the reasons that I felt that way. To me, I thought that San Diego entered the postseason a lot hotter than we did. I think San Diego, like, entered the postseason with a much more postseason ready roster. I think the Dodgers have shown me a couple things in that series. Number one, our bullpen is like at its absolute best right now. Between Phillips looking as good as he's looked, Kopech looking untouchable, Trinan looking like prime Blake Trinan. Vesia is hurt, but Banda has been really good from the left-hand side. Like, our bullpen all of a sudden looks like a serious asset, which we don't really have a choice but for our bullpen to be a serious asset if we are going to have World Series aspirations. And so that's really encouraging to see. I was pretty loud about the fact that I thought that we should have just gone straight back to a bullpen game in Game 5. To me, against San Diego, to me it didn't make sense to go back to Yamamoto after he has looked so like San Diego has his number all year. And sure enough, Yamamoto in a big spot, just like he did in the Japan series last year, Yamamoto in a big spot all of a sudden finds another gear. And we saw that happen earlier this season at Yankee Stadium too. When there's a game that leads to Yamamoto having greater adrenaline, he seems to respond really well to that, which is a really encouraging sign for a 25-year-old who you signed for the next decade plus. So, I think like those things were really encouraging in that series from a pitching perspective. Leads because I'm not concerned about our ability to score, right? Like I think our lineup is good enough, and guys seem to be doing pretty okay with the moment this year. That like I think we're going to score. Like I think, don't get me wrong, a good starting pitcher can shut us down if they're pitching well, but I think the offense looks pretty good. The other thing that I want to say is Dave Roberts has like actually managed really well. Like in that first, and I know it's not what you're expecting to hear, but like I got to give the guy credit when he deserves the credit, and he does based on how he's managed so far this postseason. Now, I see a lot of Dodger fans who are like, oh, well, like you need to extend him. Like all the Dave Roberts haters have been proven wrong, blah, blah, blah. It's like, guys, if you're satisfied with winning the NLDS with this roster, like if that's enough for you to be like, oh, he's doing a great, like, then like you need to up your standards just like you need to up your standards in general. I mean, the reality is that he's been at the helm for about a decade. We've won one World Series and it was in front of no fans, and he's had arguably the most talented team in baseball every single one of those years. Like, you need to up your standards a little bit if that's good enough for you to be like, oh, keep him around forever. Like, he managed one good series. I give him credit for that. I want to see it continue. There's nothing I would like more than to see Dave Roberts like kind of figure it out and us have success under him. I think he's a wonderful human being. I just like I need to see more than a couple games of him making the right decision before I'm like bought in, But look, game one, Yamamoto clearly didn't have it. He went and got him early. Kopech came in, couldn't throw strikes. He reacted to the situation quickly, got him out after 3 batters. That's all I can ask. And I think he did a good job of sticking to his bullpen plan while being a little bit flexible in the bullpen game. So, and I've seen a little bit more energy out of this team. So, like, all the things I was looking for from him came about in that 5-game series. So, I really hope that continues. We'll get into the series. I think on paper, we're the better team. But again, you're dealing with a lineup that is just on fire right now and finding ways when they need to. And that's a scary thing. So nothing is going to come easy.
It certainly is not. And why don't we let's talk about this, because I think like I had way more faith in the Dodgers than you did entering into the postseason. And it was because of these reasons. And it was pretty much what has played out in that Padres series was if their pitching could hold up and keep them in games, they'll outslug San Diego. Like I genuinely think that this lineup will outslug San Diego, and that's virtually what happened. Also with the result of San Diego getting shut out in Game 5, which is like that. I'm sure you were there for every bit of that. Just them getting shut out like that to close the series. Oh,
yeah. I mean, a little bit of like Schadenfreude from my side, right? the antics that we saw in game 2 when San Diego won 10-2, like obviously Dodger fans that were throwing stuff onto the field, that's never okay, right? But I think the way the Padres were acting in that game was not like normal baseball, high energy, like not even normal rivalry stuff. It got to a point where it was like, man, like y'all really aren't acting like you've been here before. Like Tatis spent the entire game basically in right field with his back turned to the field, just like gyrating at fans and making faces at fans. And the whole time he's in the dugout, he's doing the same thing. Like, you know, Profar has had issues with fans in the outfield in a whole bunch of road stadiums. I mean, he called Giants fans the worst fans in baseball earlier this season in a similar situation. Like, there comes a certain point where, like, it is kind of cool to see like a little bit of baseball karma for the team that like was frankly acting like they hadn't been there and being really fucking obnoxious. Like to see them get that, you know, to see them not just lose, but go 24 consecutive scoreless innings to end the series. It was like very validating. And then Profar after the series being like, oh no, I'm not giving the Dodgers pitching any credit. We just didn't hit. It's like, okay, buddy, like
relax
and enjoy Cancun. Right. Like, so, yeah, I mean, it felt good to beat that team in particular, especially because the Padres' entire existence revolves around LA. Like, if the Padres had won that series, I'm not kidding. If the Padres had won that series and then been swept by the Mets, they're going into the offseason like swaggering and boisterous because they beat the Dodgers, not concerned about the fact that they didn't win the World Series. And don't get me wrong, we want to beat the Padres. It is fair to call them a rival of ours at this point, but like, but like we got bigger aspirations than that. So,
well, listen, I as soon as Game 5 ended the way that it did, the first thing that ran through my mind is Dalton's having a field day with this because, like, the way that series ended was just so in like a fuck you kind of fashion. It was great. So. Yeah. I'm happy to hear that. I'm very disappointed though that like I said, I always say this. I'm glad the Dodgers won for you because you're my friend and I like all that stuff. But like the fact that Dave Roberts managed you well disappoints me for the sake of our show. It really does. I say that every week.
Yeah, but, I mean, I get it, but I'm always going to give it to you straight. Like I'll put it this way: I'm never going to fake my frustration if it's not there. You know?
I felt. Listen, I was obviously taking playful jabs at you on Twitter a little bit. Not even really jabs, but I thought it was fun to point out how like the emotional roller coaster that you went through before Game 5 and then heading into Game 5. What the Dodgers are so fucking stupid for starting Yamamoto, and then he throws like 5 shutout innings, and you're like, what a great decision by starting Yamamoto. I was like, oh, that's so hilarious.
Listen, I'm gonna tell you what I think up front, and I'm gonna own it if I'm wrong. And man, I've been really happy to be wrong so far.
There you go. It's just I love that. I thought that was so great, but but that's what it is. That's what postseason baseball does to you. You know what I mean? Like I was literally in Game 3 of the Yankee Royal Series. I was sitting down on my couch, blanket in hand, biting on it in the 9th inning. Like, just being like, please don't fuck this. They were up 1 run. Like, you got the middle of the order coming up. I'm just like, please don't fuck this up, or it's going to ruin my entire week. Like, please just don't fuck it up. And they didn't. So I'm glad about that. Okay. So I usually do this every time the Super Bowl comes around, right? Where I rank the matchups, the potential matchups that we could see in the Super Bowl, right? So this year, obviously, this is our first year of Bicoastal baseball. So why not do it for matchups that we could potentially see in the World Series? And I think it's really, really interesting. Because honestly, I think the potential matchups that we could get are really, really good. This has a lot of really exciting matchups here. So I'm going to throw mine up first. Okay. So this is how I rank this. And Dalton's going to poop on me, but I don't really care. And we talked about it a little bit yesterday. Listen, me being from New York, I think Yankees Mets just having a Subway Series World Series would be one of the most electric series that we've had in a while. Like, I think, like, you obviously have, the Yankees, who could be argued as the best team in baseball of all season, against a team that over the last 100 games has certainly been the hottest team in baseball. So I think Yankees Mets, just the energy that comes with that, the hatred that comes with that, the annoyance that comes with that. I think, like, obviously it resonates heavy in New York, but I do think that people would end up feeling that throughout the entire country. Like, I think that there's a lot of, like, preface to this series that that everybody could kind of just, like, become a little bit of a part of. Yankees Dodgers, I think, is like, that's like the obvious one. You got the two biggest brands in the entire sport. I think you're looking at, again, a Yankees team that could be argued as the best team in baseball. You have a Dodger team that could be argued as the best team in baseball, and they all have their strengths, and they're all kind of like, they're both kind of opposites of each other. I mean, Dalton and I kind of talked about it before during our rants, where, like, the Yankees' strength so far in the postseason really has kind of been their pitching, which I didn't expect, right? I didn't expect their starting pitching and their bullpen to be as good as what they've been over the postseason, and their bats have kind of struggled. The Dodgers, I think, are a different story, right? The Dodgers, I think, feel way more secure about how their offense is going to end up playing out, and their pitching is what gives them a little bit of pause. So I just think having this, and I mean this literally, this kind of bi-coastal matchup between the Yankees and the Dodgers would be, like, refreshing for baseball. It really would be, because I think what you're seeing here is just like I said, the two biggest brands in all of baseball. You're seeing two of the two teams with massive payrolls, two teams that went balls out in the offseason with Ohtani and Juan Soto and Yamamoto and all these guys. Like, these two teams finally clashing in a World Series, I think, would be really, really refreshing for baseball. Guardians Mets, I think, is just the true underdog story, right? And as much as I hate to give the Mets all that credit, but I will. The Mets, certainly, if you would have asked us at the beginning of the season if the Mets were going to be a World Series contender, I would have laughed in your face, right? But the Mets have played themselves here over, like I said, over the last 100 games. They've been phenomenal. They've been one of the better teams in baseball over the past several months. So there certainly is something with that. The Mets are certainly a fun team to root for right now, especially if you're a Met fan. But even if you're an outsider, they're a fun team to root for, obviously, with Grimace and all of that shit. Like, the gay Mets and everything. Like, there's all of this stuff that Met fans seem to be climbing on, and it just works. Like, something that they're doing right now is just, it causes them to play better baseball. And Francisco Lindor has been really at the forefront of that. It's just been a remarkable team to watch over the past several months. And the Guardians, being the team now that the Cubs have won the World Series, they're the team right now with the longest World Series drought. They haven't won a World Series since 1948. Like, this is a team that certainly is hungry for a World Series. And it's also another one of these teams, right? Like, Dalton and I both were kind of under the impression that this team wasn't going to be any good at the beginning of the season, but they've surprised people. Their bullpen, their pitching has come through. I mean, Josh Naylor has come out as a really, really solid player this year. Jose Ramirez is Jose Ramirez. They got a great year out of Stephen Kwan. Like, you're looking at guys that you're like, okay, like, they're going to be okay, but not this. So you're just looking at two teams that theoretically shouldn't be there, but one of them is going to come out on top. And Guardians Dodgers, I think, is just I don't see very many storylines here, and I know that like, and again, I'm sure I'm going to get some argument on this. Like, outside of the Guardians being who they are, like, I just feel like there isn't much. Like, this is truly David versus Goliath here, and I just don't generally find a matchup like this fairly all that interesting. But again, look, with the Dodgers not winning a World Series, or I mean, obviously it's since 2020, but in recent memory, they haven't had World Series success, postseason success. That's certainly something to look at. I want to make it clear, I don't think that any of these matchups are potentially boring. Like, I think in years past, we've seen matchups that have that could be perceived as just like okay, like I like it's not something that like genuinely gets you to the television, but I think this right now, as far as stories and everything like that, could be the weakest of the potential matchups. So I'll go, like I said, I'll bring it up again just real quick. Yankees, Mets, Yankees, Dodgers, Guardians, Mets, Guardians, Dodgers. That's what I have as far as matchup rankings for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say my piece on the whole Subway Series thing in a minute.
Yeah.
But I think, like, in general, you and I are obviously each going to have the World Series ranked where, like, the ones that involve our team are going to be our top two. Like, that,
Yeah.
like that part is automatic. So the more interesting thing is, like, how do we rank between those sets of two? How do we rank them? But, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is there's the one thing that I'll give you on Guardians Dodgers is it's the only series out of these four that doesn't have like an easy to point to storyline, right? Like Yankees Dodgers, you have the history of them playing in a bunch of World Series against each other and Judge versus Ohtani, right? And you have like the two behemoths from each coast, right? That's the thing. Yankees Mets is obviously the Subway Series. That's there's an obvious storyline there. I don't think that storyline resonates nationally quite the way you do, but there's a storyline there. Guardians Mets, I think, is actually interesting from the backdrop of the Francisco Lindor trade. And I think like that's it's there's a lot of kind of debate to be had around that. And then Guardians Dodgers is the Casey Blake series, maybe.
There you go.
I think Guardians Dodgers would be interesting just from the fact that you've got like this upstart team from the AL against like the Dodgers. But I agree, right? Like we're not the only series out of the four that I think MLB would be kind of upset to see is Mets Guardians. Like I don't think that's what they want because I think that becomes like yet another season of MLB like clearly not sending its best teams to the World Series. That doesn't mean that those teams don't deserve to be there if they get there, but like they're not the two best teams in baseball by any real measure, right? So I don't know if you've got my rankings there to pull up, but I'll give you a run through on them as well. So obviously I've got Yankees Dodgers number one. It's relatively appalling to me that you don't. I think it's like it's look. So here's the thing. Yankees Dodgers is what baseball wants. It's what the average fan in the middle of the country who isn't a Guardians fan wants. It's the best possible result for baseball fans in general. If you're not a Guardians or a Mets fan, which totally fair for those folks, right? But this is the two biggest brands in baseball, full stop, from separate coasts in baseball's two biggest markets. It's a matchup that people who aren't even fans of those two teams have been clamoring for at times in the last years. We almost got it in 2009 when the Dodgers lost to the Phillies. We almost got it in 2017 when the Yankees lost to the Astros. It's Aaron Judge against Shohei Ohtani, the undisputed two biggest stars in the baseball world. There is no argument to be made to put a series above Yankees Dodgers. Period. I don't think I need to explain that further. Guardians Dodgers, I'm a Dodger fan, man. Like I'm not gonna like that it has to be Dodgers in the top two series. So I'm not gonna lie, that's part of why that goes there. But I do think you still have some East versus West feel there. You've got some David versus Goliath feel there. I also would particularly like this series because I only live about 5 hours away from Cleveland right now, and there's a slight chance maybe I can drive up there and afford to go to a game or two. So that would be cool. But, obviously Guardians versus Mets and then Yankees versus Mets. The reason I have those in that order is I think genuinely and this is me, right? This is just what I prefer to watch. Yankees versus Mets is such a I'm trying to think of how to explain this to you without offending your New York sensibilities. But people in New York, and especially New York sports fans, have this attitude that everybody else in the country hates. That the way the attitude goes is, well, if New York is involved, it's better for the sport. Like, that's the attitude that New York fans take toward their sports teams. Like, the number of times I've heard people say, oh, the NBA is better when the Knicks are good. Or, oh, like, NFL is better when the Giants and Jets are good. And it's like, no, like, you guys are just another market like anybody else. Yes, you're a huge market, but the idea of the Yankees and Mets being the most nationally interesting story is insane. Like, I promise you that it's not the most interesting story outside of New York. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there's nothing interesting about it. Like, it's an interesting thing that they're both in the same city, but I think that that's way more fun for people in New York than people outside of it. And especially with this year's Mets, I don't know, man. Like, there aren't that many people. Like, here's my thing with the Mets, and this is where you might think that I'm absurd. The only difference between the Mets and last year's Diamondbacks is that the Mets are in New York. That's the only reason that they're thought of as this brand. It's just because they're in New York, and I think most of the country that doesn't necessarily resonate with. To me, Mets Guardians is Diamondbacks Rangers 2.0. It's just not interesting because the Mets don't resonate nationally the way their fans think they do. Also, Yankees versus Mets is it's one of those things that I hate to use the term circle jerk, but that's kind of what it becomes. It's just New York fans really just getting to sit in this idea that they're the center of the baseball world when New York is the furthest thing from the center of the baseball world in terms of where baseball is played at the most competitive levels, where baseball players come from, where baseball is the most loved sport per capita. New York is not even close to the center of the baseball world. And so part of it for me is I, from an emotional perspective, resent the fact that New Yorkers think they are. No, because think about it this way, right? If you tell me one kid grew up in New York and one kid grew up in LA, right?
Mhm.
Talk about the likelihood of that kid's life revolving around baseball in their childhood. It's not even close how much more likely that is to be true in LA.
Yeah.
Not even close. Partially because we play baseball all year in LA. We have and it's not just LA, right? It's LA, it's San Diego, it's Phoenix, it's Houston. These cities where it's warm enough to play ball all year, we do play ball all year, and especially cities that have the large Latin American influences like you see in Miami and LA and San Diego and Phoenix. Those are countries where baseball is a national pastime like it is in the States. And I think the idea that New York is the center of the baseball world just because it's the biggest city in the country frustrates me and is insulting as somebody who actually comes from the center of the baseball world.
Yeah. Well,
So,
hey, hey, look, points well taken, right? And like I said, I think because I'm from New York, right? Yankees Mets is going to hit a little different than Yankees Dodgers will because I'm not as focused on the national perspective as I would be from the local perspective. I live on Long Island, right? So I'm not in the center of Manhattan or anything like that. But at the same time, I'm surrounded by Met fans.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, as we've outlined several times on this show, they are the most obnoxious people in the history of baseball. They are.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that.
I don't know. It would really be a hard discussion for me. If I would rather have to spend a night with a bunch of Met fans or spend the night with a bunch of Philadelphia Eagle fans. I just don't know what's worse. I don't know. So, so I'll say this. I think from a national perspective, you're 1,000% right, right? In the fact that Yankees Dodgers is without a doubt a bigger series. It is. And this is why, and again, this is kind of why I like to do this. And it's because we're kind of both getting a personal feel here of because I'm not even saying that Yankees Mets is going to resonate throughout the entire country and everybody's going to feel like a New Yorker and no. But for me, living in New York, it's going to be electric as balls. It just will be.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
In New York, it will. If you're anywhere else in the country, you're kind of just like rolling around.
As you texted me yesterday, you're gonna the rest of the country is gonna be collectively rolling their eyes.
Yeah. No, but I totally get it, right? Like if you live in New York, it's a dream, right?
Yeah.
Like I totally get that. Just like how if you live in Chicago and the Cubs and the White Sox play in the World Series, that's a dream, right? Like, so no, I mean I totally get it, right? You living in New York, I'm not surprised that the Subway Series is something that would be thrilling to you. I get it. I just don't. It's not that we don't share the same perspective there.
Listen, you don't want to give the city of New York the satisfaction, and I get it because we're annoying. That's what we are. That's
the thing, right? Like, and I thought it was encapsulated really well. I don't remember who was who on Twitter about it, but like, there were a lot of Yankee fans who were like giving this very like little brother attitude toward Royals fans on Twitter. And I love, there was one Kansas City fan who was like, hey, like, just so you know, our city's won 4 titles in major sports in the last 10 years. Your city's won 0. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, it's like, don't, from a market perspective, don't talk down to us. Like we've done more winning recently. And I think a lot of New Yorkers, like, they could go 30 years without doing any winning, and they still are just like, no, we're the king market because we're New York. And it's like, you're the king market size-wise, but like, let's not pretend that New York teams have been the dominant forces in sports in this century. Like they haven't.
No, they haven't. They have not. And you're 100% right. I think the sense of pride that Yankee fans feel is obviously, in a sense, dated, but it's also like I don't really give a shit about all that. You know what I mean? Like 27 world championships. I don't care if most of them were before when our parents were born. I don't give a shit about any of that. The fact is that we have them. So, period. Like I'm just,
and that's the right response, right? Like own it. Be like, yeah, sure, you can call it dated if you want, but we're the fucking Yankees, so fuck you.
Right.
I think that's the right attitude to take.
We're fucking pinstripes on our jersey, and we don't give it. We got no names on the back. We got no facial hair. I'll fucking deal with it. Like all the backlash that comes out, I will defend it until I die.
All right, own it.
Anyway, let's preview some of these series. All right, so let's start on the National League side because I think this series, is honestly unbelievably more interesting than the American League side. I just do. Right, like Yankees Guardians feels like it's the two teams that got to buy in the American League, right? And the Guardians, obviously, their World Series drought, the fact that they've kind of surprised everybody with where they are right now. But I think Dodgers Mets is truly like the Dodgers were supposed to be here. The Mets obviously were not, and the Mets are as annoying as they come, right? So I want to give you kind of the lead on this. Dodgers Mets, where do you see it going? How do you see it playing out? What are your thoughts heading into this series?
So, man, going into the Dodgers Padres series, I felt a lot of conviction about what would happen. And I ended up being wrong, but I don't regret the fact that I felt conviction about it. Like I stand by the reason why I felt that way.
Yeah.
I don't have any conviction at all going into this series. And part of it is just like, so I think I'll kind of think through, I'll talk through some factors that I think work to each side's advantage. In the Dodgers case, I think the biggest thing for us is the Mets. The Mets starting pitching has been excellent, right? They lead baseball in postseason quality starts with 4. Nobody else has 4 quality starts. And it's because Manaea has been good. It's because Quintana's been good. It's because Severino's been good. That being said, none of those are starters that when you see them on the lineup card across from you, you're like, shit, we got to go face Jose Quintana tonight.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas like if you have to face Garrett Cole, or you have to face Dylan Cease before he got shelled, or you have to face Tarek Skubal, you're like, oh boy, like, you know what I mean? I think Sean Manaea deserves a little bit more of that than he gets, but in general, like it's not a rotation that scares you. And so I think if the Dodgers can wreak havoc on the Mets rotation at all, then like this series could honestly like be over quick in the Dodgers fashion. Like it could. Because the Mets are going, are going to really have to lean on a bullpen that hasn't been that great. Like since September 1st, their bullpen is 20th in ERA.
Yeah.
And it's, so like I think if the Dodgers can put together the quality of at bat against the Mets starters that they need to, and not let these guys go more than 4 or 5 innings and like really just like put the squeeze on them, I think that's where the Dodgers can like really start to, squeeze the life out of this series for the Mets. Especially because the Mets bullpen is very right-handed. Very right-handed. I mean, outside of David Peterson, I don't think they have a lefty that they feel super like bullish on. They've got the one guy, and his name's slipping my mind. I think it's Young or something, Danny Young. They've got the one lefty, but like, I'll put it this way: I think the Mets are going to have to get Shohei Ohtani out with right-handed pitching in the series, whereas the Padres, like, they had Tanner Scott they could go to late in those games, or Adrian Morejon they could go to late in those games, and throw, or even Yuki Matsui, and like throw a lefty at Shohei late in games. The Mets don't have a ton of ability to do that.
Right.
I'll say this from a pitching perspective for the Mets, going Kodai Senga in game 1, I don't think is a great decision. I really don't, because I mean, obviously the guy hasn't pitched much, right? He had the one start against the Braves in the regular season. In the postseason, he came out and pitched 2 innings against the Phillies and gave up a run and was like fine, but like this guy's barely pitched. Like this is a lot to ask of him to go into Dodger Stadium and make any kind of a start. And I know they're only expecting 3 innings out of him, but in a 7-game series against that lineup, is that really how you want to start things?
Yeah, right.
With a starter going a maximum of 3 innings, because what's going to happen is if Senga's not really good, you're breaking glass on the David Peterson card early. He's probably having to throw 3 or 4 innings in game 1, which means he's not available until what, game 4, probably. And now you don't have outside of your starters, you better hope that your starters last, because otherwise you don't have a lot of lefties to turn to out of the pen. You don't have a lot of reliable guys to turn to out of the pen. So I think the Mets are potentially putting themselves in a tough spot by starting Senga in game 1, because especially if Senga doesn't pitch well, but even if he does, they're exhausting their bullpen a little bit right off the bat.
Yeah.
Dodgers looks at their bullpen arms right off the bat. So as a Dodger fan, I'm happy to see Senga starting game 1. He, obviously the stuff is really good, but right now he's not a guy that scares me. That being said, the Dodgers starting pitching isn't necessarily in a great place either. So yeah, I think the biggest, now as far as to the path for the Dodgers winning, right? The way it looks is the bullpen continues doing what it's doing, and our offense doesn't let their starters get into the 6th or 7th inning. I think if the Mets aren't able to get these 6-7 inning starts that they've been getting out of Minaya, Quintana, and Severino, they're going to really struggle to hold our offense down. And I think this could be a 4 or 5 game Dodger win. Now, the path to the Mets winning is David Peterson has to pitch really well. Because I think David Peterson's the most important factor in the series for them. If David Peterson can give them quality left-handed innings, out of the bullpen, I think that's going to be a huge deal for them.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing for the Mets is I don't think their offense gets enough credit. There's a chance that this Mets offense can blitz the Dodgers starting pitching and put the Dodgers in a position where our bullpen's really gassed. That Mets offense, the way it's currently constructed, is really deep. I mean, now that Mark Vientos is a dude, they're deep, man. So I think I think it's going to come down to this: can the Dodgers hit the Mets starters and keep them from going deep into games? And can the Dodgers bullpen continue doing what it's doing?
Yeah.
If the Mets starters can get through 6 innings, twice in the first 3 games or something, it's going to get dicey. My official prediction for the series, Dodgers in 6.
Yeah, I think that's definitely reasonable. And I agree. I agree with everything that you just said, right? I think it's fairly simple to break down, right? Because I think the Mets bullpen has been a thorn in their side all year. That's no secret, right? Forget even the last, whatever. What was the stat you throw out? The last month or something like that, or what?
September 1st. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
20th.
So since September 1st, forget about that. I mean, even before then, I mean, they really have struggled to find any sort of consistency. I mean, and we're seeing it in the postseason, right? Like we're seeing the Mets, like they're winning games, but they're also almost giving up games because of their bullpen, right? Phil Maton has been like bad for them lately. And he's one of their more high leverage guys. Phil Maton's been bad. Edwin Diaz has been okay. Let's just call it how it is. The command really hasn't been there. He's not shutting guys out right now. So yeah, I think that would worry me a little bit as a Met fan. I know the Mets just played the Phillies. I don't think the Phillies lineup is all that comparable to the Dodgers right now. I don't, especially with how Philly has played pretty much since the middle of the summer. Like the Dodger lineup is just better right now. Like they will hit you more. Like you have guys in the Philly lineup that are at the bottom, like granted at the bottom of their order, that are virtually non-factors, right? Like Johan Rojas is virtually a non-factor offensively. I don't really feel the same way about like Kike Hernandez, right? Like I think it's a totally different story when you're talking about the offensive side of the ball when it comes to the Dodgers. I think there's going to be, some sense of a rude awakening. Now, when I was going like this to you before, it's something that we discussed, right? It was magic dust. Like eventually it kind of needs to, I don't want to say come crashing down, but it just kind of needs to like halt a little bit, right? Yeah. I think the Mets, for at least one game in this series, I think the Mets are going to get lit up. Like there's going to be one game where it's going to be like, oh shit, like this is different. And I think once that happens, like the series is just going to turn on its head. So I feel the same way as I did with the Dodgers as I did in the San Diego series. I think as long as their pitching can keep them in games, right? As long as Yamamoto can keep them in games, as long as Jack Flaherty can keep them in games, if you can get one, and all I'm saying is one legitimate something start at a Walker Buehler, like okay, like then I think this skews heavily in the Dodgers' favor. I've said it multiple times before. I think if they're healthy, I think the Dodgers are the best team in baseball, without question. The problem is that in their pitching staff, they're not healthy. The point that you bring up about their bullpen, I think, is well received, because like they need, like the Mets need to get outs in a very non-traditional way of how to get the Dodgers out. Like, and that's really something that I think is going to be a problem for them. They need guys to step up bigger than what they have so far. Like, if you look at their bullpen, I don't think that there's a guy that you can point to where you're just like I trust him to legitimately get outs in a massive spot, especially if you're going up against the top of the Dodger order. If you have to go through an inning where you're facing Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman, like I don't know that you're like feeling all too confident about that. So I agree. I think I will give the Mets 2 games. I'm going to take the Dodgers in 6. I think the Dodgers are the better team. And I think, truthfully, the only thing that would put the Mets over it is if the Mets are just that team this year. You know, and there's no real like logic behind that. It's just like, are the Mets the team this year where just everything seems to be going right at just the right time, and that's it. And honestly, like it's going to be insufferable if the Mets beat the Dodgers in this series. You know what they're going to talk about? Frankie Lindor should have won MVP over Ohtani, which is the most ridiculous bullshit I've ever seen I've ever heard in my life. Like
I just laugh that off. Like, I don't even give it the time of day. I mean,
Yeah,
look,
it's not close. It's not close.
part of the reason I don't want to give it the time of day is like Lindor's been so good that I don't want to take away from it, right? Like, I don't want to
Yeah,
be someone that's anti-Francisco Lindor because he's been amazing, right? So, like,
yeah,
I engage in that discussion, but
yeah. We can't. No, we can't. We can't. But yes, I agree. I think Dodgers in 6 is the right way to go. I think the Mets again that they'll win a game or two. I think they'll win a game at Citi Field. Um, they may even take one at Dodger Stadium. I don't know, but I think the Dodgers just outweigh them offensively. Their bullpen is much much better. I just kind of get the feeling like if the Mets starting pitching doesn't dominate, like you've said, I don't really have much confidence in the Mets going into the series. I think the Dodgers right now are the favorite here.
Part of the reason that I feel that way and agree with you is the Mets against the Phillies. Like, I think they ran into a Phillies team that is just not like just wasn't in the right like space,
No,
headspace, kind of. And I think what the Mets now look, the Mets beat both the Phillies and the Brewers because they managed to repeatedly come back late in games against the bullpens. Like, and that's, don't get me wrong, that's a super impressive thing. And that tells you a lot about a team's mentality. Like, I think the Mets have a really good approach late in games. I think that they never believe they're out of a game. Like, I think there is like legitimate mojo to what they're doing that I don't want to like shit on. But at the same time, like, to get through another 2 series, especially what are now 7-game series, where the only way, like the Mets aren't, they had the one game against Philly where they jumped out early and like kind of just beat them, right? But other than that, like, the Mets are not winning the first 5 or 6 innings of games. They're having to come up with like frantic rallies late to win. And I'm talking dating back to Atlanta, right at the end of the season.
Yeah.
The Mets almost didn't make the playoffs because the Braves came back and almost beat them in that first game, right? So like,
Yeah.
I think the Mets, it works in a positive way for them mentally that they're kind of playing with house money. I think it's part of what allows them to play so loose, and it's part of why they've been so good late in games. But also, like, when you get into the 8th inning and you're trailing, I don't care how many times you've come back and won games like that, the odds are still stacked against you, right? And I think betting on the Mets to win this series is betting on them to continue to pull rabbits out of the hat. I'm not saying it won't happen. Like, we've seen teams like this get hot, but like,
Yeah.
I'll put it this way. Like, could the series go away where the Mets pitching comes out and just like their starting pitching comes out and shoves and the Dodgers don't make adjustments and the Mets like actually go into the late games leading? Sure.
Oh yeah.
But I think the more likely pathway to the Mets winning the series is multiple late game comebacks.
Yeah.
And this Dodger bullpen has been lights the fuck out. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's been ridiculous. So I kind of feel good, but it's the postseason. The Mets are hot. I can't feel that good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, you said it perfectly. They'd have to win games in ways that they haven't really been winning games. Because like this Dodger team is not going to lay down in that respect. I think the Dodgers are going to get out to early leads. Like that's kind of how I feel about this team. And I think the Mets are going to have to do the opposite in order to win this series. Okay, let's talk Yankees Guardians here. I think I don't obviously I don't feel like ridiculously confident going in as a Yankee fan. I don't. Because the Guardians are a better team than the Royals are. But I think the discrepancy doesn't favor the Guardians in this respect. The Guardians are given a lot of credit for their pitching, right? Like they find ways to shorten games. They are my wife is calling me, by the way. But they find ways to kind of shorten games. They have a phenomenal bullpen, all of that stuff. I buy into their pitching 100%. I mean, listen, I've kind of like had to sort of buy into their starting pitching, which I don't find it possible. But here's the thing that I will say. It doesn't favor the Guardians when you go from playing against the Tigers, who, even in their success, have not been a very good offensive team, right? To then playing the Yankees, who are one of the best offensive teams in all of baseball. Like, there's a massive discrepancy between like your 1, 2, 3 in a lineup being, instead of like Justin Henry Malloy, Riley Green, and Parker Meadows, like it's now turning into Gleyber Torres, Juan Soto, and Aaron Judge. Like, it's just a different ball game. So I'm not saying that the Guardians pitching can't adjust, but it's a big adjustment. Like, that's a lot to ask going from one series to another after they scratched and clawed, by the way, to get themselves into this position, hitting a go-ahead grand slam against Tarek Skubal in Game 5. Like, that's something that I think, like you want to talk about pulling rabbits out of a hat. Like, that's like the very definition of pulling a rabbit out of the hat. Hitting a grand slam off the best pitcher in all of baseball in Game 5 of a series, right? So it doesn't favor them in that respect. I think the Yankees are going to outslug them all series. I do. I think I have more confidence in the Yankee lineup than I do in Cleveland. Also, given the fact that I think the Yankees and the Guardians, given their postseason history, the Yankees certainly have an upper hand here. And I think that genuinely does play a little bit. So I will say I think it's going to be a tight series. I do. I'm going to say Yankees in 7, and they'll go to the World Series. So I think it's going to be Yankees Dodgers. I'll say Yankees in 7. They'll out-hit Cleveland, and their pitching will do just enough to get them through the series.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree on the winning side. I have a feeling. So, okay, I kind of want to approach this the same way I approached Mets, Dodgers, which is like, how does each team win, right?
Yeah.
The Yankees have many paths to winning. The Guardians have only one. The only way the Guardians win this series is their pitching like kind of just flummoxes the Yankees, gets the Yankees into like a weird mental state of like, oh boy, we're cold. And their offense kind of just like does enough and has some mojo, right? Like that's kind of the path. And I think the problem for the Guardians, they have to get these games into the 6th, 7th inning, like either ahead or tied. They have to. Because I don't think that, like, I'll put it this way. Like, I don't think they're in a position to like stage late comebacks if they're down a couple runs. Like, I think they're going to have to find a way to keep these games tight late and rely on their bullpen to hold the Yankees. Like, I think I'll put it this way. If the Guardians win this series, I think you're going to see some 3-2, 4-2, 4-3, 2-1 ball games.
Yeah.
The problem for the Guardians is Matthew Boyd and Alex Cobb, like, and Tanner Bybee, like, these are guys that, like, in the AL Central, which, don't get me wrong, the AL Central exceeded expectations this season, but in terms of the lineups you're facing, those are guys that in the AL Central are passable. Like,
yeah,
when you're facing the Tigers, Matthew Boyd or Alex Cobb can look like a really solid starter. But it reminds me a little bit of the Giants in 2021, where it's like, okay, but when a real lineup comes in against you, like Alex Cobb might against Detroit or against Kansas City or frankly against Minnesota, be able to go out there and give you 5 or 6 innings of 1-run ball.
Yeah.
The problem is against the Yankees, that very quickly becomes 5 innings of like 3-run ball because the Yankees can run into some balls with some power.
Yeah.
And that's not good enough. Like, the problem for the Guardians is that if Tanner Bybee, for example, gives you 5 innings and gives up 3 runs, you're probably down 3-1, realistically.
Yeah.
And so I think we know the Yankees have the better lineup. And frankly, I think we know the Yankees have the more talented starting pitching. I think the Yankees win this series before it gets back to Yankee Stadium. Like, I think the Yankees finish this series in Cleveland.
Wow.
Maybe not a sweep, but I think they probably win in like 5. Because I just don't think Cleveland has the firepower needed in any phase of the game. Like, I think Emmanuel Clase is great, but even with their bullpen, like, a lot of these other arms have been good. But, like, do I trust Hunter Gaddis to get laid outs at Yankee Stadium in the ALCS? Like, not really. You know what I mean? Like, do I trust Eli Morgan to get laid outs in the ALCS? Not really, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I think the Guardians are like they're a cute team that like does things really well around the edges of baseball in a way that like makes them a really competitive, feisty team throughout a regular season, allows them to go on a run like they did this year. But I just think that this is where it ends. And I mean, I would feel the same way if they were playing the Dodgers or the Astros or the Phillies. Like, I just don't think they're on that level. And I for me, the Guardians' path to winning is going to be like them, like the Yankees' bats are going to have to go cold for the Guardians to win. I'll put it that way.
And I think you're right. The reason I have more pause, I think, than you do, and a little bit less confidence than you do, is because I totally can see that happening.
Sure.
Like, I can totally see the Yankees just being stifled by not even the Guardian pitching, but just by themselves. Like, there is a world where Aaron Judge goes 1 for 25 in the series. Like, as crazy as that sounds, like there's a world we live in where that can happen. Like, I'll even say this too. Like, it almost seems very, very convenient for Cleveland as well, and for any of the teams that are going to be playing the Yankees going forward. Like, Austin Wells seems to, after having an unbelievable, like, late season, has pretty much completely gone cold. Like, his bat has fallen asleep. Which is a shame because I think he's going to be a very solid player, but he's really kind of gone cold at the wrong time. I just think this is a lineup that, and I've seen it too many times this year and in years past, where like the possibility of them going cold is just too likely for me to feel any better than I am now. Like, and look, like, there's a very strong possibility that they totally prove me wrong. They show why they've spent so much money in the offseason trying to build this lineup and everything like that. Like, I can get all of that, and there's a total possibility that happens. I just think that through what I've seen this year, the Yankees have extreme highs and extreme lows, as we've kind of detailed. And right now, offensively, they're certainly not in an extreme high. Like, their pitching has really kind of won them games. And we even outlined it early in the Kansas City series. I mean, they were kind of fortunate to be tied 1-1 heading into game 3. Like, so it's not as much of a sure thing to me as I think you're making it out to seem, just because, and maybe it's scar tissue, but I get that feeling where it's like, it's just not going to be that easy.
Yeah, I mean, who can blame you, right? I mean, it's here's the thing. One thing that both of our teams are up against are like fire-breathing closers. And like that's like in a postseason series, that's a real thing where like both the Dodgers and the Yankees are running up against a team that, like, man, like if you're not leading going into the 9th inning, good luck. I think that's a real thing. And I think, like, I mean, I don't want to belabor the point of like it's baseball, but like it's baseball, man. Like you can only be so confident.
It is.
I just think that like the things that the Guardians are good at, like, require a large sample against like meh, like they require a large sample against like the masses in baseball for the things that they're good at to play out.
Yeah.
once you get into a small sample against baseball's best talent, it's a lot harder for those things to win.
Yeah.
That's my general take on the Guardians, and I just think the Yankees are a lot better than they are. But that doesn't mean the Yankees are going to win, man. Like, better teams lose baseball series all the time. And Mike, it brings me to, I got one more point on each side that I want to make before we go, and I'll start with the point in the AL side. I saw a tweet that really bothered me yesterday that I want to just address as like a sentiment in general, right? Like Keith Law, who is a really well-respected baseball writer, great at what he does, like Hall of Famer.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
He put out a tweet that was just like, oh, well, you can't blame fans nationally for rooting for the underdog. And isn't it great for baseball if Cleveland, this team who has a way lower payroll than the other teams, like if they were to do something, wouldn't that be special? Look, there is no moral high ground to owners being cheap, and we need to stop glorifying it as if there is moral high ground to it, okay?
Yeah, right.
It is not good for baseball. It's terrible for players. When teams that don't spend money win, it validates teams not spending money, and it hurts the players' ability to make money. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, well, doesn't Shohei Ohtani, doesn't Aaron Judge, don't these guys have enough money? Yeah, of course those guys do. But the problem is that when a team like the Guardians wins the World Series, it also it hurts the players on the lower end, because teams can look at them and be like, no, we don't have to pay guys to win. So we're not going to pay guys, right? It emboldens teams like Oakland and Pittsburgh, who aren't really trying to be competitive, because they can point to the Guardians and say, look, we don't have to try to be competitive. We might just be competitive anyway. That's not good for baseball. Let's stop pretending that that's good for baseball.
Yeah.
I think it's great for baseball that 3 of the 5 highest payrolls in the game are in the championship series, because it gives a data point to that, like, hey, you should be paying players. You should be trying to win, because trying to win makes you more likely to win. Like, I think that's to me, this is like an objective truth. Like, I think the best for baseball is to have teams be rewarded for trying to win. So miss me with the moral high ground of the small market team having a chance. Like, no, the small market team didn't care about winning as much as the big market team. I don't want to hear about owners crying poor. Okay, thanks. I needed that rant.
Well, look, I agree. I think, like, there is something to be said about, like, underdog stories, and I certainly, like, think it's fun to root for a team that shouldn't be there, right? But you're 100% right, and I think the reason that Keith Law is and people like Keith Law are saying stuff like that is because, like, they almost, like, have this sense of, like, equal opportunity here in baseball, when that just simply isn't the case.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I I I agree that, like, it could be fun, like, seeing a team with the 26th ranked payroll in baseball go far, but that's also of the sentiment that, like the team with the 26th highest payroll in baseball is all of a sudden going to change their tune because teams with high payroll are now, like, I just kind of feel that, that you're right in the sense of, like you're kind of isolating the, like, how do I put this? It's the point I'm seeing on the other side really is just, like, you're, like, if you don't have this sort of excitement towards teams in the, like, lower bracket of payroll, right? It seems like you're almost isolating that part of the league at, like, just try harder. And while I also agree with that sentiment, I also have, like, a lack of optimism that because the Yankees and the Mets and the Dodgers are in the championship series, that's all of a sudden going to wake up the rest of baseball and be like, oh, wait, we have to spend money to win. You know what I mean? So, like, I agree with you, but I also think that, like, unfortunately, this sort of happening in baseball is just, like, this isn't going to, like, catapult change. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and look, I agree that the Guardians probably are the sentimental favorite in that sense. I just don't think that they should be.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah.
And it's not that I look at it and like I'm like, well, no, you need to root for the big guy. No, it's just that like I just don't want to celebrate like teams paying their players, and in most cases that means also their employees in general less money.
Yeah.
Because like to me, I'm just like, okay, well, like are you rooting for the business to make money, or like are you rooting for them to like want to put a great product on the field for their city? And like Cleveland is not the biggest offender of this. They're just the team that happens to be left. But like it's the same thing with the Pirates, right? Like the Pirates looked pretty good at points this season, and don't get me wrong, like I understand why as a baseball fan it'd be fun to see the Pirates stick around this late, right? It'd be like a cool story to tell. But I also like the only angle of that story that I hate is when the angle of that story goes, isn't it cool that they're here without paying their employees as much? Like, no, that's not what makes us cool is that we didn't think they'd be here. But like think about the Mets, right? Like what makes the Mets story cool from a baseball perspective is that the expectations were low. Yeah, the Mets have the highest payroll in baseball, but a lot of that payroll is with guys who aren't there anymore. The expectations are low. But what and this is me speaking positively about the Mets, so mark that down. Right? But
Yeah, seriously. What day is today?
But what I'll give the Mets is this. Like I prefer an underdog story like the Mets because this is a team that, like, while I think that their logic and how they try is flawed, this is a team that is trying like hell to win year in and year out. Right.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I can respect that. And seeing that get rewarded with an unexpected run, I'm like, yeah, that is a story that's like cool, right? Like,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying every team has to spend $300 million, but like there needs to be a floor to this shit. Like you need to be spending at least, I think, 150. Like the fact that you've got teams out there that are spending 30, 50, 70 million dollars on their team. I mean, come on. Like,
yeah.
Like this idea that it's like, oh, well, baseball is not profitable. They're not making the stop. Like, I can't do it with that. I got one other point on the NL too, but I'll let you kind of wrap this up on the AL series.
No, I agree with you. I'm going to let you go into that too because I think that you're 100% right. I would certainly not be against sort of like a payroll floor. I think that the trouble with that is that you might be handing out contracts that some guys don't deserve just so that you can meet the threshold. But
who cares, right? Like, I mean, look at the NBA. Like, look at the guys that get max contracts.
Well, yeah, I mean, geez. you got fucking Tim Hardaway Jr. making $25 million a year.
I'll put it this way: I would so much rather be like, oh, well, this guy's making more than he should. Like that bothers me so much less than like, oh wow, this guy is like a huge star making the owners tons and tons of money, and like they're not paying him what he deserves. Like, yeah, I'm always going to be on the side of labor and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I agree with you in that sense as well. So, all right, what do we have before we get out of here?
Okay, and this should be a quicker gripe. The idea that like baseball thinks that it's okay to put game 2 of the NLCS at 1:08 p.m. Pacific time. Like, I can't even begin to express how frustrating and angry it makes me. How frustrated and angry it makes me. Like, yeah. It is such a load of shit. Like, the reason that all year long the Dodgers play at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific is because that's what's going to get the most eyes to the television. That's what's going to get the most fans into the stadium. Like, that's the reason at the end of the day. I get that, like, a national audience is involved now, but I would just once like to see MLB make a decision that's oriented toward, like, what makes the most sense for the fan that wants to watch your game.
Yeah.
And, like, because even on the East Coast, this game starts at 4 p.m. Like, Mets fans are going to have to be watching the first several innings of this game at work, a lot of them. Yeah. Dodgers fans, if they're not able to take off work and go to the stadium, which is a crazy thing to be asking people to do when you're one of the final 4 teams remaining. Like, Dodger fans are going to have to watch this game while working. They're not going to be able to get together with their families. They're like that just sucks, man. Like, it's just fucking bullshit. Like, the idea that, like, if I'm a diehard Dodger fan who's always wanted a chance to go to a playoff game, and like I have to take off work to go to a 1 p.m. Like, what are we doing? Seriously, like, what are we doing? Like, Yankee game is at 7:30. That's fine, right? But like, why don't you just put the Dodger game at 9 Eastern, 6
Yeah.
Pacific? At least give us a chance, right? Because at the end of the day, the people that want to watch baseball, they're willing to stay up till midnight to watch baseball, like they are. You're gonna, like, I'll put it this way: when do you think you're gonna get more eyes on this baseball game on TV? At 4 p.m. Eastern, like the hours of 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, or the hours of 11 to 12 a.m. Eastern? I mean, like,
It's certainly late night. Certainly
right.
late night.
So it's like not only does this decision hurt both fan bases involved, and especially the fan base that's at home and earned the right to be at home.
Yeah.
Not only does it hurt those fan bases, I also don't see how it helps you get a bigger national audience to the game.
Yeah.
I think this is just Rob Manfred being short-sighted and not being willing to like think critically. And I think it's a fucking embarrassment that this game is going to be at 1 p.m. Pacific on Monday. Random.
Yeah. But honestly, we've both had issues with how baseball handles fucking TV bullshit. Like, whether it's scheduling or selling out to streaming services, but like the fact that I'm a Yankee fan who lives in New York and I need to go to 4 different places to fucking watch a Yankee game is beyond me. And 2 of which I then have to pay extra for on top of what I pay for my cable. Like, it's crap. It's crap. So that's my big gripe. But again, I agree. It all kind of centers around the same thing of like you want to know why you're not growing the game. It's reasons like this why.
Yep.
It's this shit that like has to come to an end.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right. There we go. So okay, here, let's close it with this. So we both have Yankees Dodgers in the World Series. Who you got?
I mean, I think the Yankees are a little bit better positioned to win a postseason series than the Dodgers are right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think what it would say about the Dodgers and what they are able to accomplish with their pitching if they get there closes that gap a little bit for me.
Yeah.
I like that the Dodgers would have home field advantage in that series, although I don't think these series should be 2-3-2. I think they should be 2-2, 1-1-1.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, if you get Dodgers Yankees in the World Series, I think you're genuinely staring down the barrel at a coin flip. Like, I actually think it's just a 50-50. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I think the series goes 6 or 7. I think it'd be a ton of fun. I'll go with the Dodgers just because, like, who the hell am I to pick against the Dodgers if they make the World Series?
Okay, I'll take the Yankees for that reason. I was leaning Dodgers, but I'll pick if you're picking the Dodgers, I'll pick the Yankees, whatever. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's truly Goliath versus Goliath, and like in baseball, I feel like that's different than when you get it in like football or basketball or anything, like, because you're kind of getting the same result every year in those 2 sports, right? Like especially in the NBA, where like the Cavs and the Warriors played each other in the finals for 4 straight years. At that point, that rivalry just became stale, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yankees, Dodgers, Goliath versus Goliath. This is going to be fucking insane because we haven't seen it in forever.
Yeah, it's the inverse of the argument I was making earlier, where it's like, I mean, the thing that is kind of frustrating as a baseball fan is that like you'll get like, no disrespect to Diamondbacks or Rangers fans, like awesome for them, right? But like from a national perspective, Diamondbacks Rangers is not fun, right? Like nobody thought that those were nobody thought those were the 2 best teams in baseball last year, and it's kind of just like, all right, I mean, hey, like cool for whoever wins it, but like what are we actually learning here, right? Like
right.
This is just the teams that got hot, right? What makes Dodgers Yankees as a potential series so special is that it's the rare instance of baseball like actually sending its 2 best teams to the end. It's a little bit like the more recent examples I can think of. Like I thought Dodgers Astros in 2017 had that feel to it.
Yeah.
I thought Dodgers Red Sox in 2018 had that feel to it.
Certainly.
I thought Phillies Astros had that feel to it a little bit, where you're like, man, like these 2 teams are both really good and deserving of a title if they can get one, right?
Yeah, right.
So that's like Dodgers Yankees would be the ultimate of that, where it's like you've got the number 1 seed from each side, you've got the 2 biggest baseball markets there are. Like It would be amazing. Obviously, that's what I was rooting for.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's what we both want. It'd be great for our show. But okay, that does it for us. That's Dalton Brown. I'm Mike Guido. This is the Bicoastal Baseball Podcast on the Grid Network, the only exclusive baseball podcast on the Grid Network. We'll see you next week. I'm sure we'll be loaded with shit to talk about as we are deep into these series by then. And who knows? Maybe we'll be talking about a series that's already over by then. So, all right. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.